Welcome. This is a presentation about natural resource management. We're going to talk about the following. Are people part of the problem or part of the solution when it comes to natural resource conservation? Keywords are natural resource management, local governance systems, resource degradation, tragedy of the commons, agency structure, conservation and deforestation. But first of all, when you hear the word natural resources, what comes to mind? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Alright, maybe water, maybe pastures, maybe forests, maybe fishing areas, and of course there are wildlife. There can be a lot of examples of natural resources. For natural resources, it's crucial that they are managed in a sustainable way. Now, what does that mean? Managing natural resources in a sustainable way. There are many definitions of sustainability. I would describe it as that short-term usage won't endanger long-term usage. So you use it in a way so the resource can renew itself, can restore, and you don't use it too much, so it can't be used no more. It may sound obvious that you have to make sure that long-term usage isn't endangered, but to realize this is very complex. It involves many different actors at different levels. Local people, biologists, companies, governance, local governance, national governments, different organizations. There are all different actors, parties that can have an interest or are involved in it. They can be the part of the problem, and they can also be part of the solution, of course. And of course, every one of these actors will have their own interpretation about what is sustainable and what is not sustainable, and they will have their own interests. But in the end, it's very important. Natural resource management is very important because many people's livelihoods depend on a natural resource. So that means if it can't be used no more, there will be no alternatives. Because the risk is that if a resource is not managed well, that the resource gets lost forever. And the tragedy of the commons happens. Now, what is the tragedy of the commons? It's a theory by Mr. Hardin, and it says that if a natural resource is shared by many users, and each user only acts according to self-interest, short-term interests, and is not thinking about the group interests, and is not thinking about long-term interests, then the resource will degrade. And for instance, in this case, no more fish will be left. So, for instance, if these fishermen, they know that each can fish only 5 fish every day. But, well, maybe the fisherman over here will fish 8 fish a day and he will do 10 fish a day. Now this fisherman thinks, hey, wait, I'm fishing 5 fish a day and they're fishing 8 and 10 fish a day? Well, I mean, they're making more money than I am. He feels stupid and he will probably say, I'm gonna fish more fish as well. If they're doing it, I'm doing it as well. And if everybody acts this way, of course, soon there will be no fish left. And of course, this happens in many cases. It's the tragedy of the commons is a theory by Hardin, and he also said that increasing populations can speed up the process of the tragedy of the commons. So the more population there is, the more pressure there will be on natural resources and the more degradation there will be. Now, this is theory. Let's have a look at a case study. Let's go to Kissidougou in Guinea, Africa. Leach and Fairhead did research about Kissidougou. You can watch a YouTube video about their research. The landscape in Guinea generally is savanna. However, around the villages there are patches of forests. For the forest scientists, it's semi-deciduous humid forest. Scientists and policymakers see these forests as something that's left of the past. Once there was a forest that was much larger than this forest, and people have cut down trees, and that's why only a little bit of forest is still left. And of course, local people are seen as backwards. They don't care about conservation. They use the forest in a bad way, and that's why the forest looks degraded. And I agree. If you look at the forests look degraded. And of course, this way of thinking fits perfectly in the widely accepted narrative that increasing population causes deforestation, and local people are causing this deforestation. Well, and several scientists have visited Kissidougou and have written about the deforestation and about the forests and following this narrative, this common narrative. So that the land is deforested and exploited by the local people, and there should be more conservation. Fairhead and Leach also went to Kissidougou, and they lived there for some time. They were anthropologists, and they interviewed many people of different villages. And what they found was something completely different. Something completely different than the scientists before had found. They found out that when they talked to the old people of the villages, they heard a different story. They heard that there used to be savanna around the villages and no trees at all. And trees had been planted and growth of the forest had been encouraged by the community leaders. This of course contradicts entirely what scientists before Leach and Fairhead had found. Of course, Fairhead and Leach also looked for historical data that backed up these stories. They found many sources that confirmed this. For instance, Sims in 1860 wrote, "There are no trees, the whole country is a prairie." But also other sources confirmed that there was savanna in the 18th century and in the beginning of the 19th century. So this means that the idea that there once was a huge forest and only small pockets of that were left was false. The forest was man-made. But it's also interesting to look at conservation. What conservation efforts were there? Well, Fairhead and Leach found aerial photos of the area around 52-53, and the vegetation pattern had stayed the same. In some areas, the size of the forest even increased since 52-53. So this means that the forest is conserved well by the people. Of course, between 52-53 and now, the population of Kissidougou has increased. but the forest has stayed the same, has even grown at some places. And Fairhead and Leach observed different ways in which local people were conserving the forest. Different practices like managing early burning, protecting some trees, and more. Of course, local people also benefited from the forest. They harvested some products and they hunted wildlife to some extent, but at the same time they also had conservation efforts. Um, so that means that the idea that local people were backward and caused deforestation, in this case of Kissidougou, that idea is false. People planted the forest and they conserved it. Now, what does this case say about the tragedy of the commons? The tragedy of the commons say that people will act out of self-interest, and that's the reason why natural resources will be degraded. Well, this case actually shows that people can be part of the solution related to natural resource management. It's and and population increase does not automatically mean that natural resources suffer, because people can find their own ways in coping with the natural resources. And also, what Fairhead and Leach also mentioned, that if the government would impose strict rules how to conserve the forest, that may not work, because then they would restrict the people from cutting certain trees, getting some products from out of the forest. That will decrease their incentive to conserve the forest. So these local ways of conserving may be more effective than that if the government imposes strict rules to conserve for the forest. And of course, but this is one case. You cannot say this is just one case, but I can tell you about Miss Ostrom. She is a Nobel Prize winner, the first female Nobel Prize winner of economics. She heard about the tragedy of the commons, but the theory of that, and she wanted to find out for herself. Well, here are some more pictures of Kissidougou. This is the forest that people had planted. And here is Miss Ostrom. And she heard about the theory of the tragedy of the commons, but she wanted to find out for herself what this meant in practice. She traveled all over the world, and what she found was that in many cases, people had found ways to manage natural resources together. Local people had come up with local governance systems to protect the natural resources that they depend on. Sometimes these systems had been in place for decades, and part of these local governance systems were rules. Rules who is allowed to use the resource in what way. This is not formal law, this is informal law. Some people call this customary law. People are monitoring each other, and of course this includes penalties for people who break the rules. And what Ostrom found is that often these local governance systems worked better than natural resource management that was privatized or was run by the government imposing strict rules. And this also shows that people don't have to be victim of the tragedy of the commons. People have agency, the power to make their own decisions, the power to shape their own realities. People are wise enough to see that they need to work together to conserve a resource. that is important for them. At the same time, I'm not romanticizing these local governance systems. I mean, in many places, natural resources have have gone lost forever. For fish, for instance, usually the fish with the highest value disappears. Then fishermen switch to fish with a lower value and fish that take more labor to harvest. Okay, an example is the Philippines. And about these local governance systems, um, they may be under pressure because of migration. Governments build roads into forests, which increases logging and increases deforestation. And because of modern technology, it's easier to get fish out of the water, which puts more pressure on fish resources. And also, sometimes people see local communities as something harmonious, as something peaceful, as something there's unity. That doesn't have to be true. Sometimes the idea of the community is problematic. There can be conflicts between groups. There can be inequality. There can be exclusion of certain groups or of certain people. And there can be elite capture. That means that leaders, they actually don't act in the interest of the whole community, but only in the interest of themselves. So I don't want to romanticize these local government systems. As you see here in the picture, access, these local government systems, they arrange access to the resource, who has access and who doesn't, uh, who can withdraw what, when and how, and of course conservation is also included, local conversation, and there may be exclusion, and the leaders may sell it to some company, and then of course probably local people will suffer because of that. But on the other hand, yes, there are not many alternative options. I mean, the options are make, having the government to impose strict rules, selling it, and people have to pay for the usage of it, or these local governance systems. And so it's better to improve these systems than to start a whole new system. All right. Um, my conclusion. Well, thanks for listening to my presentation so far. But my advice, what I want to give for people who start conservation programs for any kind of resource, can be fish, can be water, can be wildlife. Find out what local people are doing to conserve natural resources and what local governance systems there are. It's better to strengthen those systems than to start something completely new, because these local governance systems may be working in a good way. And also in general, try to understand the local people. How do they make money? What are the options to make money? What is important to them? What is their opinion about their views on sustainability, on using the resource? It's very important to understand the local context. Then again, enforcing strict rules from the government may disrupt these local governance systems. Um, they may, if people cannot use the resource anymore, they don't have the incentive to conserve it either. So be careful in enforcing strict rules. Of course, if nothing else works, this is an option, but local governance systems, in my point of view, would be the first option. And then at the same time, they shouldn't be romanticized. There can be conflicts. Of course, these local governance systems depend on trust between people a lot. And it also depends if the area is not too big, if it can be monitored well. Um, but of course, there can be exclusion as well. So yeah, don't don't romanticize local government systems too much. Oh, and I want to shortly have some attention for this question. Why did Fairhead and Leach find things that other scientists overlooked? Many scientists have visited Kissidougou. They came with different findings than Fairhead and Leach. Why is that? Let's have a look. Well, first of all, Fairhead and Leach had an open mind. They were able to look at it without having some theory in their heads, because the other scientists, they were looking for deforestation. They were looking for the narrative that local people caused forestation. And of course, the forest looks degraded, but if you dig deeper, then you find something else. Fairhead and Leach were anthropologists. They lived in the area for some time. They were able to see the world through the eyes of local people. What's important to them? What do they do? What are their practices? And they talked with a lot of people. And they found out that people had planted the forest and people conserved it. Of course, they also used historical data to back that up. And in that way, they found things other people didn't find. And it also led to the conclusion that increasing population does not have to lead to natural resource degradation. People can work together to come to solutions, to manage a resource in a sustainable way. So that's a hopeful message. So, and that's the way actually I want to end this presentation. Well, oh yes, people can be part of the solution. Absolutely. Well, thanks for watching this presentation. You don't have to subscribe to anything. You don't even have to like this video. But I appreciate comments. I appreciate questions, things that were not clear about this video, or any kind of comments or things you want to add. Let me know. I'm very interested in that. And thanks for watching. And see you next time.